Hello there. Yesterday, Ben Habib did what so few politicians do. He told us what drives him and gave us his mission and vision for the UK in a straight and no BS manner. Then it was my turn. I was one of 100 attendees at the New Culture Forum Locals event in Bournemouth yesterday, discussing the future of the UK. There is a link in the descriptions box below to the Locals page of the New Culture Forum to help you out. And because Peter Whittle was unable to attend himself, I was asked to fill in as a guest speaker after Ben. Then, the New Culture Forum national organiser Dr. Philip Kisley gave us his vision of the future. But first, over to Ben.
Well, thank you very much. I couldn't hope for a better introduction. And thank you, Philip. Thank you, Ray, for organising this. And thank you, all of you, for giving up a sunny Saturday afternoon, I think the first we've had in a few weeks, to come and listen to me. Can I ask, before I start, how many of you watch GB News or Talk TV, Talk Radio? All of you. Okay, brilliant. That means you know me reasonably well, probably. Now, what I'd like to talk to you about a bit is the mechanism by which this country got into the trouble it's in, what got us here. And I think it's very important to understand the problems, because unless we really understand how we got here, it's terribly difficult to unpick and find our way back to what I think might be a safe position for the United Kingdom. And you would have heard it said, and I'm sure many of you think of yourselves as centre-right. You would have heard the debate being between the left and the right-hand side of politics. How many of you buy that? How many of you think actually this is all about the left versus the right? Good. That makes my job much easier, because it isn't. What we've got going on, there are basically two forces that have got a grip of Western civilization more broadly, but obviously, as far as we're concerned, the United Kingdom. Now, we say that we live in a liberal democracy. You've heard that said many, many times, and it rolls off people's tongues with the greatest of ease, and they say it as if it's a massive virtue. And of course, it is virtuous if you live in a liberal, balanced democracy. But liberalism, in its fundamental essence, is the championing of the individual's right. Correct? Democracy, in its fundamental essence, is the championing of the majority's interest. That's what it is. It's the majority that rules in a democracy. Liberalism and democracy in a liberal democracy are in constant tension with each other. And it should produce a healthy result. And indeed, when we first embarked on our liberal democracy, perhaps we can trace its roots back to the emancipation of women, and the full emancipation of women in 1928, when they were put on a completely level pegging with men. And liberalism was a force for good. The discrimination that was used in order to emancipate women, progressively discriminate to ensure that they got a fair shake of the dice when they were applying for jobs. Once they got jobs, the gender wage gap, all of that was good. But liberalism has gone slightly mad. And democracy has been set aside in the pursuit of liberalism. And what started with good intentions is now ending up in an extreme form of anti-democratic, anti-free speech, enforcement of rights over and above, and if necessary, to the detriment of the majority. And the way it works is a bit like this. I'm going to talk about the archdevil in a second, a chap called Tony Blair. But the way it works, the way, I don't know why that makes you laugh, actually. He's a terrible, terrible man, Tony Blair. But he started the extreme form of liberalism, I think. And one of the reasons the New Culture Forum exists is for the same reason, by bringing into domestic British law the European Convention of Human Rights, embodying it in the Human Rights Act, and adopting it into British law. And the Human Rights Act basically does away with hundreds of years of incremental progress that the United Kingdom had made in the establishing of what it means to be a British citizen and the rights, the human rights that you get afforded as a British citizen. It set that aside. It codified the way that we need to think about human rights. And it effectively made all people across the globe equal. Even those who are not British citizens are essentially equal when they come to the United Kingdom as a result of the Human Rights Act, the embodiment of the European Convention in our domestic law. And some people may think, well, that's perfectly reasonable. Of course, they should be afforded equal rights. Why shouldn't you, if you're a Pakistani or an Indian or from North Africa or whatever, get the same rights when you come to the UK as a British citizen? Well, it's essential that you don't, actually, because if you do get the same rights as a British citizen, it nullifies the point of being a British citizen. And then it's only a hop and a skip before it nullifies the existence of the United Kingdom. And you might think that's a massive hop and a skip, but it isn't. That's the way it goes. And this liberalism has fed on itself, and it's reinforced itself, and it's found its way into every nook and cranny of our existence now. And anyone who's worked in any organization, whether it's a regulated business, an institutional establishment, government agency, armed forces, NHS, whatever it is, you would have all come across the concept, and you would have heard me speak about it non-stop on Talk and GB News, of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the protective blanket that we give those that we perceive to be at a disadvantage in our society, a protective blanket we give them in order to protect them, allow them to practice their way of life, if it's different from ours, and indeed to celebrate their way of life. And DEI is the opposite of the progressive, gentle progressive form of liberalism that was used to emancipate women. DEI is actually now become the institutionalizing of racism in the United Kingdom, because it has effectively been applied. It's been applied broadly, but it's been effectively applied to the mass number of migrants who've come to the United Kingdom over the last, particularly the last 5 years, but over the last 30 years, ever since Blair started this experiment. And so multiculturalism was born. And multiculturalism isn't lots of cultures coming together, intermarrying, producing progeny that have values from both sets of cultures, creating perhaps a new homogenous culture going forward. Multiculturalism, because of DEI and the mass immigration that we've practiced, manifests itself in what I call cultural silos. So if you go to Leeds, you will find ethnically Pakistani communities, ostensibly British, but ethnically Pakistani, ostensibly British Indian communities, and so on and so forth. And you might recall, and it could happen again as a result of what's going on between Pakistan and India, but this was on the back of a cricket match a year ago when the Pakistani ethnicity Brits in Leeds kicked off against the Indian British community in Leeds. And that was over a cricket match in which England wasn't even playing. And that attests to the breakdown of the United Kingdom. In order to be a society, in order to be a nation state, it is a prerequisite that you have a homogeneous culture. In fact, if you look up the definition of a society, it says a common culture. And what we've done through multiculturalism, mass immigration, the protective blanket we've put around people coming to this country, is actually create division in our society. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually division, inequality, and exclusion. And What's also happened alongside all of this is that in order to keep the peace, you would have noticed that our policing has become more draconian. We've moved away from the very pleasant sight of a community bobby whose most sort of aggressive weapon was a truncheon and his tall hat. Do you see those tall hats anymore? I can't even remember what it's called. Can anyone remember what it's called? Anyway, we don't see them anymore. And I remember as a child, I lived in Berkhamsted as a child. My parents had a place in Berkhamsted. And I used to know the policeman's name. And he knew my name. But if you see a policeman on the beat, which is very, very rare, because they're mostly in cars nowadays, but if you were fortunate enough to see a policeman on the street, you see him in a bulletproof jacket with a cap and often with a pistol by his side. And that, again, attests to the breakdown in the United Kingdom. Tony Blair, when he embarked on this project, set aside, as I said, hundreds of years of incremental progress in the way that our culture and our constitution had evolved. And he embarked on the biggest reformation, the biggest experimental, a priori, without any experience, reformation of the United Kingdom. And it's been a disaster. It's been an utter disaster for the country. And I haven't even touched on the economic impact of what he did, because, of course, as we all know, if you import lots of unskilled people to the United Kingdom, you put a protective blanket around them, you promote them into jobs, but you don't promote those who are meritocratically deserving of those jobs, you will hollow out the economy of the United Kingdom. You will create big burdens on our country. You will create security risks. You may have seen the other day, not so recently, a few months ago, the RAF only wishing to employ, did you see that? Only wishing to employ fighter pilots from ethnic minorities. GCHQ putting out a similar ad for interns only to come from ethnic minorities. I mean, how is it that that is even allowed? That is racism. And I think I mentioned that that is basically racism. But the racism is being practiced against you folk. It's being practiced against the majority. And that's what I mean about liberalism having gone mad. It's liberalism on steroids. And of course, if you, the majority, wish to speak about it, it's dangerous for the experimental project that Tony Blair kicked off. Because if you were heard, God forbid, you might require that some of these people who live in this country have that protective blanket removed. And in order to prevent you from having that protective, preventing you from being able to remove that protective blanket through your questioning of it, they shut you down. So we now have stuff like non-crime hate incidents, of which you may be familiar. Have you heard about these? Alison Pearson of The Telegraph was famously accosted by the police on her doorstep because of a tweet she'd made and then a tweet she had deleted. The other impact of this extreme form of liberalism that we have in this country is a two-tier criminal justice system. It's not a two-tier policing. I often hear people say we've got two-tier policing. No, we've got two-tier criminal justice, all the way from arrest to charging, to being heard, and even in sentencing of people, ethnicity is now coming into the equation. And we all know from our childhood, and if we've forgotten, all we have to do is look at the Old Bailey and look at the lady above the Old Bailey, that justice should be blind. That's the whole point. It should be dispensed indiscriminately. Because if you start discriminating in the people that you decide to incarcerate, you don't have a justice system. It's an unjust system. So on the back of liberalism, we have set aside the interests of the majority, we've introduced racism, we've shut down free speech, and we've broken our criminal justice system. And it can all be traced back to the Human Rights Act and the experiment kicked off by Tony Blair. The other thing that he did, because he doesn't like democracy. He really hates democracy. He introduced the first step away from our politicians being able. There are three things that our politicians can do, our elected representatives. They make laws and regulations. They apply fiscal policy. They make your taxes up. And they used to be able to influence monetary policy. These were the three levers of power. The first lever was taken away by Tony Blair when he created the Independent Bank of England. And you will heard, if you're old enough to remember, you would have heard it said that he didn't want political meddling in the monetary policy of this country. Do you remember that? But what is political meddling? That's democracy functioning. It may be messy, but that's what democracy is. And now we've got Rachel Reeves, her government, Starmer's government, about to pass a law which states that the Chancellor of the Exchequer cannot pass a budget unless the Office of Budget Responsibility passes it as well. So you will have another unelected bureaucratic black box determining the second leg of what our elected representatives have been elected to do, which is determine fiscal policy. So monetary policy in Andrew Bailey's lap, and fiscal policy, I can't even remember the name of the head of the OBR. Anyone know the head of the... Well, he's going to be one of the most important people in this country when this law is passed, because nothing will be able to be done without his blessing. And then the third leg of what our politicians can do, create regulations and laws, well, that's been steadily hijacked since, again, 1998, through the progressively handing over of powers to domestic quangos, such as the OBR, the Ofcom, the Electoral Commission, and so on and so forth. And also, as we all, I imagine everyone in this room is a Brexiteer. Anyone here not a Brexiteer? That's a relief. And the handing over of powers to supranational institutions. The EU is the best example. Starmer is still a Europhile, and I'm going to come back to what Starmer's up to. But the handing over of power to supranational institutions is perhaps the biggest assault on our democracy. Everything else can be adjusted domestically. We can reverse what they've done. But this handing over of power to the UN, the WHO over pandemic management, the IMF over... the IMF has the temerity to tell us how to run our economy. Who the hell are the bloody IMF? And then the other thing you would have heard said is international law. Oh, we can't do that because it's prohibited under international law. Have you heard that?
Oh, yes.
Now, we don't have a written constitution, but it was axiomatic in our British Constitution before Tony Blair got to office, that no government can bind a successor government. Are you familiar with that concept? And it's a powerful and important concept because it gives elected politicians the opportunity to change direction. But if you vest power in domestic quangos, international law, and supranational institutions, you neuter government. You neuter government's ability to actually change the law, don't you? So we can't make monetary policy in this country. We'll still won't be able to make fiscal policy through our elected representatives, and they don't even make the law. Parliament, to a very significant extent, even though we have technically left the EU, and we can debate whether or not we've properly left, we haven't, in my view, Parliament is not representing us. So this experiment of liberalism has resulted in racism and all the other things that I've talked about, including the shutting down of our democracy. But that's natural. That is what you would expect of an extreme form of liberalism, because, as I said, the majority's interests threaten the individual. And so Tony Blair, to give him his credit, was extremely good at setting aside everything that was important in our democracy. And there's another force that's been taking hold over the last 70, 80 years that has gone hand in hand with liberalism, and it's globalism. I've touched on it with the supranational institutions, international law. But after World War II, there was a belief, rightly probably, that muscular, belligerent nations, some more than others, I suspect, needed to be held in check. And so the European Convention of Human Rights was born, the United Nations were born, and people began to cooperate more on an international level. And that was probably important then. But let's just take the European Court of Human Rights as an example. I think it was set up in 1949, correct me if I'm wrong, and it's got 46 members. It's got 18 basic conventions, and its court used to meet, and it was an advisory decision that its courts used to make until 1995. In 1995, the European Convention was varied so that if you were a member of the European Convention, you had to accept its court as the supreme judicial body in all things that related to the convention. Any arbitration, any judicial, any judgments basically had to be adopted by the country in question. And between 1949 and 1995, when the convention was actually working the way it had been intended to work, the European Court of Human Rights had about 850 judgments, which were, as I say, just advisory. Since it was elevated to the position it now holds and taken into British law, and the European Court adopted as our supreme judicial body in 1998, how many adjudications do you think it's put out? 23,500. It's on steroids. And can any of you name any of the magistrates, they're not even proper judges, any of the magistrates that sit on the European Court? No one knows. But they are the supreme body that govern human rights in this country. And the other thing, I'm going around a bit now, it's a bit of a collage I'm painting, so forgive me if it's not linear in the delivery. But you must all wonder, and I used to puzzle over it, how is it that the Channel, which had acted as a moat to protect the United Kingdom for thousands of years, has now become an Achilles heel, that actually it's easier to police a land border. When I was growing up, I used to say it's very difficult to police a land border because it's hundreds of miles long, maybe thousands of miles long. People can come in from any direction. The little bit of water between us and France is eminently capable of being policed. And what had acted as a moat has now become our Achilles heel. Why is that? And it's the reason is born out of the same liberal, global, philosophical order. It's because the people who are seeking to break the law coming into our country are afforded the same protections as you are. And so it doesn't matter that they're breaking the law to get into the United Kingdom. Their human rights must be observed. And it doesn't matter that civil society in the United Kingdom may be threatened by them. That threat comes later. So they will preserve and protect the criminals' rights, but they won't protect yours. And that principle too has found its way round our criminal justice system. So you will often see criminals getting the benefit of the doubt and the victim having to justify their position. How do you think it was that we allowed the gang raping of underage girls in the United Kingdom on a wholesale basis? How did that happen? It happened because we had mass migration coupled with positive discrimination in favor of those who came to this country, a tolerance and a celebration of their cultures to the detriment of our own culture, a broken criminal justice system which protects the criminal, not the victim. And we have in the process, we've set aside sanity in this country. And so, The big threat to the United Kingdom is neither from the far left or the left, or the far, I don't know anyone who's far right, but from the right or the far right. That is a complete misrepresentation of the problems in the country. The threat that we're facing comes from the liberal global order, which has set aside our democracy. And in setting aside our democracy, it has set aside the interests of the majority of the people in this country. That is the fight. Now, Starmer will want to call it a fight between the left and the right, because somehow in common lexicon, being a lefty is fine, but if you're right-wing, it's a hop and a skip to being far-right, and before you know it, that conjures up images of swastikas, and even the St. George's flag now is vilified. On St. George's Day, did you see this? So on St. George's Day, Starmer said that instead of celebrating St. George's Day, he came up and he said, we've got to reclaim the St. George's flag away from the far right. There ain't no bloody far right in the United Kingdom. If you believe in your country, you're now regarded as far right because it's this extreme form of liberalism that wants to shut you down. I'm going to talk about Tommy Robinson. I don't know Tommy Robinson. I'm not an apologist for Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is one individual among many. We all have equal rights. We should all be treated equally. But Tommy Robinson, in my view, is undoubtedly a political prisoner. There is absolutely no way. Tommy Robinson is a victim of everything that I've just gone through. And you probably know the case, but I was having to explain it to my erstwhile leader, Nigel Farage, who doesn't seem to get it, that Tommy Robinson, yes, he was in contempt of court, correct, but it was a contempt in a civil action. And the remedies available in a civil action basically involve a rap on the knuckles and fines and an escalation of that sort. What you don't typically get in a civil action is the Attorney General deciding that the contempt of court is of a matter of public interest, which is what the Attorney General has to decide before he gets involved. Remember, the Attorney General is a political appointment. He's a Labour Party appointment, a guy called Lord Hermer. Who knows anything about Lord Hermer? Yeah, he's a first class, isn't he? And he wanted to vary the Legacy Act that the Conservatives brought in, which in itself was terrible. The Legacy Act was meant to put a line under bringing criminal prosecutions for terrorism and other activity in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He wanted to vary that act so that Gerry Adams and others could make a claim for compensation against the British government. That's the Attorney General of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We prosecute our own soldiers because they were the victims. We don't prosecute the criminals. The IRA were the criminals, remember? But we will protect and promote and allow Gerry Adams to bring a case for compensation because he was incarcerated without the Secretary of State signing off on it. Such a small point of law that Lord Hermer had to focus on. Anyway, Lord Hermer decided that Tommy Robinson's civil action was a matter of public interest. He then brought it in and made it effectively a criminal act and directed the courts to incarcerate Tommy Robinson. So he was put in jail, I think, for 1 year and 8 months with a minimum of 9 months to be served before he could be released. And that is political imprisonment. And it's perhaps no accident that it was for showing a film, which also happens to be the shutting down of free speech. But perhaps the most egregious example, and again, I'm sure you're all aware of it, given the nodding heads on all the other subjects. The most egregious example recently has been the protest that took place after the Southport killings. The Prime Minister, after the Southport killings, should have got up on television and he should have said, the girls who were killed in Southport had been killed in a monstrous way. There were other girls who were also very physically damaged and hurt by this monster. The monster is a second-generation Rwandan. We've got it wrong in this country. Our policy of mass immigration hasn't worked. Multiculturalism and the protection of those we brought here and their promotion and celebrations hasn't worked. And I, as Prime Minister, am going to put that right. And from this moment forward, the British people will feel the protective arm of the British state around their shoulder. Do you think there would have been any riots or any protests if he'd got up and told the bloody truth? And if he'd just said what I said? Everyone would have been relieved. But he didn't. He got up and he said, the perpetrator is a Welshman. Now, by no stretch is Axel Rudikabana a Welshman. When you say someone's a Welshman, you conjure up the image of a middle-aged man in a field with a load of sheep. The sheep may be in danger, but he poses no danger to anyone else. And that's how far we've fallen. And the reason I tell that story, one of the reasons I'm telling that story is he got up on television, instead of making the speech that he should have made and that I would have wanted him to make, we would have wanted him to make, he said all those protesting are far right. Actually, there were probably white working class people who voted typically Labour, who would have wanted Labour to represent their interests. But he classified them all as far right, and a bit like Lord Hermer did with Tommy Robinson, he directed the criminal justice system to arrest them, remand them, charge them, and then incarcerate them. He directed them. There was no question. And the Home Office came out, even before the trials had taken place, and it said, we have arrested so many thousands have been, over 1,000 arrested in a matter of days. We have arrested so many criminals, they said. They were found guilty before the judicial process, which is another symptom of globalism. It's an infection of European law where you're assumed to be guilty if you're charged, and you have to prove yourself to be innocent. The presumption of innocence ahead of being found guilty was a quaint British thing. The European model is the opposite, and we're now infected by the European model. So Starmer is part of that liberal global order. Starmer, moving on now slightly, Starmer, again, you probably heard me say this on Talk and GB News. Starmer was in Montreal at a conference in September 2023, and he didn't know the camera was on him. And he said to someone that if I am ever made Prime Minister, I will align the United Kingdom so closely with the European Union from a regulatory and in all other ways that people won't even be able to tell the difference of whether we're a member or not. Are you aware of that? Yeah. On the 19th of May, Starmer is going to Brussels for a summit in which he says he's going to reset the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. What he's going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is make the United Kingdom take the knee to the European Union. He will argue that we need a common defense of Europe because NATO is weakened by Trump wishing to withdraw from NATO, that we all need to come forward. And in that false aim, he is going to say that we will be joining forces with our European friends and partners, and we're going to join the European Defence Union. We will join permanent structured cooperation, which is their form of NATO, but worse. And we will work with our European friends and partners. That's what they always say, friends and partners. We'll work with our European friends and partners to establish an interoperable military across Europe for the defense of Europe. What he's actually saying is that he is going to hand over control of the British military and our foreign policy to Brussels. If you join permanent structured cooperation, you can look it up, it's a rule that you cannot challenge EU foreign policy. It's a fundamental component of it. So we will have to do whatever the European Union wants. And permanent structured cooperation isn't like NATO, which is another post-World War II construct that worked so well for so many years. It's not like NATO, where you have independent member states coming together as independent sovereign entities, deciding to work together for the common good. It is European armed forces under the direction of Brussels, which is another unelected bunch of people. That is what Starmer's going to do. He's going to say that I'm so grateful to the Europeans. This is precisely what he's going to say, by the way. He's going to say, I'm so grateful to the Europeans for allowing us into their military, European Defence Union, that I think it's only fair that we give them more access to our fishing waters. They've been demanding it, and we're going to hand it over. Wasn't fishing an absolutely totemically important part of the fight for Brexit? And didn't Boris Johnson and every successive Prime Minister and Minister in Cabinet turn their back on our fishing industry? No one talks about fishing anymore. They bang that drum because it pleased them to bang that drum in the run-up to the referendum, and they've turned their backs on fishing. So he's going to give away more fishing, he's going to give up our armed forces, and goodness else, he's going to align us on sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, which will make it very difficult for us to have a free trade deal with the US. Not that I'm a great believer in free trade deals, by the way, but it's going to make it very difficult. He's banging the drum about this deal that he signed with the US last week. That was just about a reduction in tariffs. His heart is not in the Anglo-Saxon sphere. Starmer's heart is in the European Union. And he wants to take us back in all respects. And I, therefore, cannot conclude anything other than the fact that Starmer is anti-British. His entire political, philosophical framework is anti-British. So what are the solutions to this liberal global... Oh, there's just one more thing on the liberal global order. It's become difficult to tell the difference between Conservatives and Labour, not because right has become left, and this attests, by the way, to the point that I was making, that it's not about right versus left, because the Conservatives there should be some distinguishing characteristics about the Conservative Party which allow us to determine that it's conservative. But they look and feel and behave exactly the same way as the Labour Party. And that's because it's not about right and left. It's about liberal global order. And the Conservatives are firmly in that camp. They may not be as extreme as the Labour Party, which no longer represents the working class in this country, but they are absolutely there. And what reform has captured, the mood that reform has captured, is the mood to be British, to once again be proud of our country, not to allow people like Welby to claim that we're responsible for the slave trade, our wealth depends on the slave trade. When I was canvassing in Wellingborough, I went to sixth form Wellingborough politics class, and I asked the class, how many of you think our national wealth comes from the slave trade? 2/3 of the class put their hands up. You know, not a nod to the agrarian revolution or the industrial revolution or all the great other inventions that we created, the creation of our fantastic common law that's been so infected now by European law. All these things, which I was taught as a child, were the foundations of our greatness, are not taught anymore. They've been set aside. We're having our children indoctrinated. But reform has captured this mood. So why have I fallen out with reform? The reason I've fallen out with reform is, I don't want this to be a Nigel Farage bashing exercise, but the reason I've fallen out, because I don't, I've done a lot of it. The reason I don't want to fall out with reform is, the reason I don't want it to become a Nigel Farage, I have fallen out with reform, and that is irreconcilable. And the reason is because effectively reform has captured the mood of the people, but it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. if you look very closely at what Nigel Farage, you don't have to look that closely. If you look just reasonably closely at what Farage is saying and doing, he's pivoting dramatically to this liberal global order, to the point, for example, where his treasurer, what's his name, Nick Candy, on the day that he was appointed treasurer, was in the Sunday Times singing the praises of Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson. Now, if you've got someone at the senior level in your own party who doesn't understand that Tony Blair is the devil, you shouldn't be in Reform. He put Charlie Mullins forward as a candidate. Charlie Mullins, no jab, no job. Charlie Mullins, yes. A complete lunatic Remainer. And on the day that I condemned that suggestion that he should be a candidate, people came back at me and said, Ben, he may have changed his mind since 2016. And I thought, well, yeah, I suppose he could have had a conversion. But thankfully, from my own saving my own face, that afternoon he went on GB News and he said, if I could vote again, I'd vote to go back into the EU. He's learnt nothing. So, and Charlie Mullins is a candidate. And Sarah Potchin, their successful candidate in Runcorn and Helsby, she was welcoming Syrian and Afghan migrants to Cheshire East. She was attending transgender events at which children were present. She was chucked out of the Tory party. She was then chucked out of something called Labour Independence. She's hopeless. And that is, Nigel Farage is Reform, and Reform is Nigel Farage, and he's a fantastic campaigner, second to none with the exception of perhaps Boris Johnson. But we know how Boris Johnson's administration ended up. It was a disaster at every single level. And the party, Reform, could have coped perhaps with Farage if it had properly democratized, if it had set up a system by which the leadership was elected, was held accountable, and that other great people, listen, this country ain't going to be saved by one man. It has to be saved by a bunch of great men and women. We need great minds, fearless speakers, ideologically solid people who will not waver to take office in 2029. And we are in Last Chance Saloon. And that's why, as I'm sure you're aware, I fought hard to reform, to democratize it so that great people could join without the fear of being chopped down. The reason Rupert Lowe was thrown out was not because of some massive ideological debate between Farage and him, simply because Rupert was doing such a great job and was being seen to be doing such a great job. And Elon Musk said what he said about Rupert, with which I'm sure you're familiar. And at that moment, I think it was the 5th of January, from that moment onwards, Rupert Lowe had a target on his back. He was going to be chopped. And so if you're a really proud, pro-British politician, you're going to be fearful of joining Reform. You're going to, it's going to end up with a whole load of sycophants in it, and people who aren't, you're going to be fearful if you're really strong and capable, because you will be kicked out. That's what's going to happen. You won't be allowed to stay the distance. So before the Rupert Lowe thing kicked off, I joined this Great British Political Action Committee. And the idea behind the Great British Political Action Committee, of which I'm chairman, was to move the center of gravity of acceptable political debate away from the far sort of liberal globalist place at which it now finds itself to a position which I can colloquially describe as right-wing, pro-British and all of that, move the center of gravity of acceptable political debate, and then on the back of that produce policies that we could effectively hand over to Reform and the Tories if they wanted them, and to find candidates and also to even draft legislation. So that if we do get, and I think we will, by the way, I think we will get a government that is pro-British in 2029. I think that's going to happen one way or another. But so that a government could hit the road running with draft legislation. So that was the idea behind the Great British Pack. And that's what it is doing, and it will continue to do. Help to promote the agenda that we all wish to deliver for this country. But since then, Rupert Lowe did happen. And I think that spells, it's such an awful thing that happened to Rupert with the police complaint. It's exactly the kind of lawfare that reform should be standing up against. It shouldn't be throwing its own under a bus in that way. I don't know if you're familiar, but Zia Yusuf made a complaint to the police on the 7th of March, saying that Rupert Lowe in December had threatened him with physical violence. Now, if someone is genuinely concerned about being threatened, you don't wait 3 months to go to the police. You do it straight away, don't you? And so for me, the whole thing's vexatious. And that was like a real wake-up call for me, that you can't really reform under Farage. Farage is reform is Farage. It ain't going to do the job. So, and then I was rumbled trying to take control. I have taken control of a shell political party, which I'm now working on, and I hope will be structured in a phenomenally democratic, but ideologically solid way that will allow great people to come on board and stay on board and shine. And, I'll see how that goes. It's a very big undertaking. It's very difficult to launch a political party in this country. To get into the British electorate psyche takes ages, but I think the British people are calling out for it. And I don't think that I was delighted, by the way, of Reform's result in the local elections, because it revealed to me the British people are still crying out for it. They voted for it in 2016, they voted for it with Boris Johnson, and they're still voting for it. So if a credible political force can be created, it will get votes. And even though it's a huge challenge, unless you're prepared at least to have a go, you've failed before you've even started. So I am going to have a go at doing that, and I hope I will be able to bring some very many good people with me. And there's one last thing I want to say. You must be fed up with listening to me. One last thing I want to say before I finish is you will often hear politicians talk about the economy. It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy. They always go on about the economy. And on the back of the economy, they justify mass immigration because they say Brits are too lazy, they're not prepared to work, blah, blah, blah. And on the back of the drive for economic enhancement, they justify lots of bad policies. It's not about the economy. The economy is important. Our prosperity is important. But our prosperity is impossible if our constitution and our culture and our people are not put first. The economy has to serve the Constitution of the United Kingdom, the culture of the United Kingdom, and the people of the United Kingdom. It has to be our slave. It cannot rule us. And I know that we used to understand this because there was a time that we would have sacrificed our lives to protect our civil liberties. World War II is a good example. We didn't care, or our leaders in those days didn't care about the economic impact of World War II. Of course, it was disastrous. We had to give up the empire, effectively, on the back of fighting World War II. That may have been in train already, but it was certainly accelerated. Huge economic damage. But why did we go to war in World War II? Why did we do it? We did it for the protection of our freedom, our democracy, our constitution, to protect our culture, to protect what it means to be British, to protect the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and to protect the people of this country. The economy served us at that point. And so do not allow anyone to tell you that the economy must be put first all the time. We are now, as I say, in a last chance saloon. And we may have to take actions which are economically damaging in the short term in order to protect the really crucial things that matter and that will propel this country into long-term prosperity. That is what Trump is doing for America. People are looking at his tariffs, and by the way, I think it was a bit aggressive the way he went about it, but his tariffs is a yank back from the global order. His insistence that we cough up for NATO is a yank back at the global order. He's saying, I'm putting America first. Why the hell shouldn't he put America first? That's his obligation. And what we've got to learn is that we've got to put the United Kingdom first. We've got to stop pandering to this liberal global order, and we've got to say, no, we're going to ditch DEI. President Trump's ditching it, we better ditch it. He's ditching net zero, we're ditching net zero. He's imposing tariffs, we need to impose. The Indian trade deal is a bad deal. There's nothing good about the Indian trade deal. If any of you watch the news at Ben, I've done a little thing which will come out tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Watch it on the Indian trade deal. I mean, there's no level at which that serves the British people. Right, that's me done. That, I think, was a pretty broad exposition of the issues that face us. So questions if you aren't entirely had enough. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Hello there. I had to start with that one, didn't I? Now, wasn't that a great speech and a great question answer session with Ben? So I'm just looking through my notes to see what he hasn't covered yet. Well, that completes that then. But what really worries me about Ben, how did the police know his name? What on earth was he getting up to in his younger days when he said that he knew, the police knew his name? You know, well, yeah, all a bit worrying. Now, what I'm going to talk about are three main issues that I think are going to affect us greatly in the future. Woke, which has been covered quite a lot, net zero, and the rise of artificial intelligence, which has a sting in the tail, which a lot of people won't actually realise. Now, on the woke side, as far as I'm concerned, as Ben has already said, that the Council of Europe's European Convention on Human Rights and their courts rule everything, and they just make the rules for us, and we have to follow these international laws. Now, people say they're different organisations. The Council of Europe is different from the EU, which they are, apart from sharing a flag, an anthem, and some buildings. But apart from that, they're all completely different. And the whole idea of the Council of Europe's ECHR is that the UK is bad. Everything and everybody in the UK are bad people. So everyone else from around the world must come here to teach us how to be good people, it seems. And we are so bad that when we try to deport people, suddenly the rest of the world becomes worse. Have you noticed that? Suddenly we can't deport these people who came here because we're so good, because the rest of the world is so bad. And it's this sort of double think and double speak that we should be sort of looking at. And on immigration, legal and illegal, it looks like the latest figures, if you saw them this morning, over 500,000 net last year, when they were talking about, oh, we're going to get it down to 300,000 for a start. No, the figures are coming out over 500,000. And that, once again, is just a total failure of the government. And Ben's been through all of this. Now, one of the things that people don't sort of understand, I don't think, is why we have this mass influx of people. Basically, we don't have enough children these days. We haven't had a sufficient number of children to replace ourselves since 1974. That's 50 years of below replacement, what they call total fertility rate. It used to be above 2, it's now fallen, it's now below 1.5. We're only having 75% of the children we need to replace ourselves going forward. And that includes the people who settled here. Think about that. And a lot of people will say, oh, that's rubbish, Jeff. We know how certain demographics breed, blah, blah, blah. Did you know that London schools are closing? Do you know why London schools are closing? Because of the lack of children. It's because the cost of living is so high, they're driven out because they can't have children. So they go somewhere else and also because we got a declining birth rate anyway. It's across the board. In fact, the World Health Organization says by the middle of this century, we'll peak out at about just under 12 billion people on the planet. It's downhill all the way from there, according to the projections. So why worry about net zero? That's what I say. Why worry about it if the numbers are going to go down, which they are, judging by the projections. So you've got to remember that the half the reason we have this problem is because without people say we want to train British doctors, don't they? We must train British doctors. If you didn't have babies 25 years ago, you haven't got any British people to train to be doctors. We need a stable population and a policy, family-friendly policies, to keep our population as stable as possible. And that is doable. They used to do that, but then suddenly everything seemed to change. And just to put it in context, now I know this is a personal thing and people do get rather irate about this particular subject, but just to say that we had 250,000 abortions just last year. And that should concentrate the mind a little bit, finding out the causes and how we can address that. But yeah, it is all very difficult on that one. But the whole thing, everything is now top-down driven from the ACHR and the World Economic Forum. So isn't it good that Klaus Schwab's gone? But who's replacing him? Yeah. Yeah, Tony Blair, that would be good, wouldn't it? And it's all about international law. As Ben said, you know, they sign us up to international laws and then we have to obey them. Now, the Chagos Islands, we own them, or just about to hand them over. Americans have got a base on there, and we have been ordered by a court, international court, in a non-binding ruling that we have to hand the Chagos Islands over to Mauritius, which never owned them in the first place. They were just administered there by the UK from Mauritius. So what we've done, Tony Blair, yeah, he's part of it as well. But Keir Starmer and Lord Hermer, who Ben mentioned, they've decolonised us, haven't they? By creating a Mauritian colony. So we just handed a colony over and made a new coloniser. Does that sound right to you? It's just wrong, totally wrong as far as I'm concerned. Now, on the ECHR, there is one group, one body that is not a member of the ECHR. Does anyone know which one that is? An important body. No. The European Union itself is not a member of the ECHR. It has not acceded to the ECHR in accordance with the 2009 Lisbon Treaty, which came into effect in 2010. How long ago was that? 15 years of breaching international law, their own international law. They breached it by not signing up. So there you go. But what we've got coming down the tracks, blasphemy laws. They're going to come in hard, and that's going to change everything for us. Because if you're you know the street preachers, the Bibles, go out and preach. How Islamophobic is that going to be? And we are in for a real, if that goes through, we're in for a real drubbing. And what will happen is that Christianity will have to fall by the wayside for all of that. Now, I'll ask a question now. People go to church generally in the United Kingdom for 3 reasons: the baptism, the wedding, and the funeral. Can I just ask, put your hands up, who here goes regularly to church? That's more than I thought, which is a good indicator, because at the moment, although you are a minority still in the room, but when you think about it, we've got secularism and science, everything now. Oh, there's no fairy god in the sky. It's all about secularism and science and all the rest of it. But I'll ask you, if religion isn't important, then why are we worried about the rise of sectarian politics in this country? It's important. Religion is very important. So, think about that one. And also, just to sort of put a thing on it, when I look around at the universe, I go, I've got a choice. Either it just exploded into being, it was always there, or God created it. And that was the way I look at it. And I can't see anything out there that leads me away from the gods. But that's personal, me. Just moving on to net zero. Net zero is bankrupting us. But all we've done is outsource manufacturing, and now agriculture is going to be outsourced as well. They want to stop that because that's heavy on on all the chemicals that you put into the fields and stuff. Get rid of all that so that we can't grow food economically. We'll have to buy it in. I'm not quite sure how we'll buy it all in, but we're meant to buy all the manufactured goods and the food into the country by, I don't know, creating money out of thin air somehow, because I just don't see where that's going. And of course, you'll all know that CO2 is only 0.04% of the atmosphere anyway. And I've read in the science that the higher it goes, the less of its effect. Its effect becomes less as it gets more concentrated. So it's not really a problem. But with net zero comes those dreaded 15-minute cities that we hear so much about, which seem to keep springing up and shutting down and springing up over there. The people are getting wise to it and trying to stop it all, and low traffic neighborhoods and all this sort of thing. Now, I don't know whether you know this, but back in either 2017 or 2019, the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee came out with a report that said personal transport, whether it be fossil fuel or electric, is not viable going forwards. Hence, we don't have all the electric points everywhere to plug your electric car in, because it won't be long before there aren't many cars on the road. It's all going to be public transport and your bicycle. So get your pumps on and get walking. So it's one of those things. Now, here's a little funny thing that you might not know. Fossil fuels. You know, we were told the dinosaurs died for us so that they could give us, you know, the Industrial Revolution and all that sort of thing. But Saturn's largest moon, Titan, which is, I think, something like 6% the size of the planet Earth, has more oil reserves on it than the entirety of Earth. They must have had shed loads of dinosaurs, is all I can say. And you can check that fact out, because it's actually on the European Union space website. And it's mirrored in the US one as well. So you can look that up and you can say to yourself, Titan, a planet that is, you know, if you went and lived there, you'd last about, what, a millisecond? It would just kill you off instantly. You'd be fried to death, all the rest of it, because it rains basically all this, you know, acid and oil and all sorts. So there you go. That's an interesting thing, I thought, that, you know, fossil fuels, are they fossil fuels, or are they being generated some other way? I don't know. Now, I'm going to move on to artificial intelligence now, because I need some, it would help. I asked earlier about regular churchgoers and the rise of secularism and the belief in the science. We're all told to believe the science, aren't we? Do you remember the jab? Do you remember the lockdowns? The science? I must admit, when I first watched all of that, I started sort of creating my own spreadsheet when they said, oh, it's gone up by, you know, they were using numbers, weren't they, for how the rate it was spreading at. Well, I went into the science books and found out that it had a direct percentage correlation. And I put it in a spreadsheet and found that over the months of, it had gone round the population 7 times or something like that. It must have done. Even with masks, it must have gone around everybody. So I thought, I've already had it. In fact, I had the symptoms the year before anyway, and so did a couple of my friends, had those exact symptoms. And we were told there was a specific date, wasn't it? February the 28th or something. If it's before that, it's not COVID. If it's the day after, it's COVID, you know, and all this sort of thing. And I just sat there thinking, are we really expected to take all this in? So I never participated in what we were being offered. So, you know. And right now, we have the World Health Organization, which is part of the UN, by the way, if you didn't know, United Nations. They're going to, they've agreed the wording, so they're going to take over pandemic control across the world. And inside all the little print, it says somewhere that governments can keep their sovereignty, but there's a sort of a but at the end. And we are going to be led down the garden path to, you know, almost enforced reactions. And that is going, just like everyone wanted us to do in the first place. Can't get a job, you have to stay at home, you'll never be allowed out. See, if they were right about all of that, I wouldn't be standing here. And I expect there's a few people out there who are like me. And they wouldn't be here either, according to the science. So you say to yourself, maybe the science isn't all there. Anyway, I go on to artificial intelligence. I have to thank my channel co-pilot, Richard. If anyone's watched our channel, you'll know about Richard, the mad Welshman, the shouty Welshman, as some people call him. He's very bright, in fact, and he was working. I didn't even know he was doing it. He sat down most of the evening, instead of, like me, watching some flick on Netflix or something, he was studying artificial intelligence. And he found out that it's full of filters, woke filters, and it's full of flattery. The idea of AI is to keep you engaged with it. So you'll go on an AI engine and you'll start asking questions, and then it comes back. Would you like to learn more about that? Would you like us to do this? So it's trying to keep you engaged. Now, these AI engines are very personalized. They can be very personalized. So if you set it up right, they can remember you. Then that's your friend. That's your new friend, an AI. And it's telling you things, but it's all got woke filters in it. So if you ask it a specific question about something, it will give you a woke answer. And those woke answers are there so that no one else can be offended by the answer. And he was looking at this and thought, how can I interact with this thing and strip those filters out? What would happen? So I don't know if any of you have seen the video. What was it? Message to the World. It's a couple of weeks old. We put it up. And what Richard did was he stripped back everything, all the woke filters, everything. And he made up a prompt, a proper AI prompt, that just asked the basic question, without all the filters, what is the axiom point, the truth? What thing or person is the axiom point? Do you know what the answer was? Jesus Christ. And that came out of an artificial intelligence robot. Now, I have faith. It didn't shift my faith one iota. And I don't expect it to shift faith one iota, because the AI, he may not have got to the bottom. It may have said, I know you're a Christian. I'm going to feed you. So you stay with me, you know. So we don't know. And the reason we made the video, he made the video. I just stood at the front and said, you want to listen to this? It's so much easier that way. And so he went into it. And the whole idea of it was not to say, oh, the science now says that Christ is king. No, it's to say that AI is saying it. Do you believe it? If you're a real, I believe in the science 100%, well, you better go to church then, hadn't you? Was the answer. And, oh, wait a minute. No, I don't believe that bit. Well, then why are you trusting it? Why are you going to trust it in your car? Why are you going to trust it in the surgery? Why are you going to trust it with your money, with your children's education? Because the whole idea is that it's going to be filters and flattery all the way, keep you engaged. Now, you Google things, don't you? Everybody Googles things, so you put a question in, and now at the top of the page, what is there in the answers? It's the Google AI answer. Everybody reads that. Oh, that's the truth. That must be the truth. And there's reams and reams of pages underneath it, isn't there? Does anyone now go underneath, go to page 10 or check a few facts out? Most people will just look at the bare AI answer, which is a woke answer, by the way, and they will just believe it. And they'll run their lives on that basis. Few people will go delve deeper. So I don't think the problem with AI is going to be the Terminator coming through the door and machine gunning everybody at the moment. That may come, especially if you're not woke enough. But the problem is that I don't think we can trust it. I really don't. These firms who are making, they're putting billions into AI. Altruism? Altruism, really? Or do you think they want to make a lot of money out of it? Which do you think? So I would say that it's more to do with the money. So with all of these types of problems like woke, net zero, and AI, there is always a cabal of people. Ben mentioned it, didn't he? A cabal of people behind it. And they're not that big, but they're very powerful and very, very, very rich, very wealthy people, very influential. And one of the things that it's all based on is detaching us from our country and from our fellow Brits or whatever, whether if you're America, your fellow Yanks or whatever. And we have a problem in the country now And that's the inability to define ourselves. We're not allowed to define ourselves as anything but tolerant internationalists. Everyone's welcome. That's what we're meant to define ourselves as. We cannot say, no, we are who we are. And that's the reason that I and a few like-minded people got together, and you'll find on your seats a little card called the Pledge, which has been circulating. And on that, there is, it's backed up by a website with a few statements on it. And I'll just read the bit at the top. Our vision is to return power to the British people in order to defend our freedom, our family, our faith, and our home. Our pledge is to stand for freedom, equality under the law, real democracy, and family. Build a peaceful, prosperous, and patriotic society, reclaim our nation's identity, its Christian traditions, culture, and values. Give courage and hope to the British people, and resist tyranny. So if you do believe in those statements, then please consider going on the site and signing up to the pledge. And I will tell you that I was at the signing ceremony when we first opened this. Ben came and he signed the pledge, along with, I think Peter Whittle was there, and Andrew Bridgen. So, you know, you'll be in good company if you sign the pledge. And it's not tying you into anything. You don't have to give me £10,000 or anything like that. You can just look at it, read it. If you think, yeah, I can go along with that, then that would be good. Now, one thing I will add, because a couple of people have been asking about him, is Tommy Robinson. I've actually been to see him in jail, and I did a video on that. Although it's quite funny because my real name isn't Jeff. That's a long story. That's a Google thing from years ago. But I just put my real name in, my real address, and turned up, and they didn't make me sign an NDA. So there was me. Hello. I didn't have to sign an NDA, but because I want to go and see him again, I did abide by it as if I'd written it. So I did talk around it, and I filled some gaps in with what other people had said by not actually saying it. It was me sort of that came out with it. So because he does need our support, and I'm a great believer in that. He is not perfect by any means. We all know that, don't we? He's a flawed person. But I met him, and when he talks about other people. He talks about what he wants to do for the country, and his next film could be pretty explosive. So I'm just really hoping that he does get out soon. Now, what I did was I read the last judgment that was made at the court, because I went to the court, the last two cases he was involved in, and I read the report, and in there it said that when he gets out, when he's let free, he's not under license. So he can't be recalled to prison, even though he's still got 9 months of his sentence to go when he is released on July the 26th. Okay, so he's not on license, but it did say that if he did breach the injunction, the original injunction, which is why he's inside, he can be rearrested, basically. So I pointed that out. I put that out everywhere I could, and there is sort of movement on this, and a lot of his mates are saying, come on, time for you've done your job, you've done your bit, you've made your point. Over nearly 170 million views that video's had. He doesn't need to stay inside anymore. So as far as I'm concerned, he needs to purge his contempt, which is what he can do, and he could be out within a month or two. He could be out earlier. And as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what he should do. But it's not my decision. I can say it, but it isn't my decision. It's his decision. And I'm hoping that he does, and then we'll have a big party, and he can go off and recover, because he's lost a bit of weight, a lot of weight, in fact. He's a monstrous great beard. I'm an ex-sailor. I should have the beard. I've got a tash instead. But he's got a monstrous great beard, and his hair's all sort of unkempt and up here like this. So, yeah. And he's got a few more wrinkles and all the rest of it than he did have before. And other people have mentioned that as well. So it's not new news. And I've had a couple, because I don't know whether you know, there's an email system you can use to send him emails. It's called eMates, or email a prisoner. It comes under the name eMates. It costs you a few pence to send it, because it gets routed directly through to the prison. okay, through their system. So you can do that. You can send him an email through emates, and he needs the input. He needs people. Trouble is, I've had a couple that have been bounced back at me, because they seem to like doing that in Woodhill Prison. We'll just give him a hard time. In fact, it was his birthday earlier in the year, and loads of people sent him cards. There's a massive backlog. They can't get them to him fast enough because they have to check every single one. Because don't know whether you can transfer. You don't ask why I know, but I know. No, you can actually impregnate paper with drugs, and if you send it in, people can actually smoke the postcard. So that's why they do it. That's why they do this sort of stuff. They check physical parcels, physical letters, and all that sort of thing. So that's why they do it, because he is in a top security prison. When I went through the door, it was like, I was wondering whether I'd ever get out. Dogs yapping in the background as well. And because I went with Andrew Bridgen and Momus. Do you know Momus Najmi? He's another YouTuber. Yeah, I went with him. So the three of us together, and eventually got through to the point where they search you thoroughly, shoes off and all the rest of it. 3 blokes, 2 female officers searching us. And I thought, 5 blokes over there, but you've picked the 2 female officers to search us. And I thought, you're wanting one of us to kick off, aren't you? And Andrew Bridgen said, looked round at me, so I'm coming back here again, he said. Oh dear, he's a waggy. Andrew Bridgen's a bit of a laugh. Yeah, he's full of it. So anyway, enough from me on all that, because I know we're stuffed for time, but it's great. It's more important that we listen to Ben other than me wittering on, so it was great. And thank you very much. And for people who do watch me on YouTube at Jeff Taylor, really nice, and thank you very much. And now to Dr. Philip Kisley, who has a history of being cancelled after spending 25 years in the higher education system. He is now the Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum and the National Organiser of the New Culture Forum Locals. Here's his thoughts for the future.
Since I've taken on the Locals mantle, the National Organiser, I've been doing just an awful lot of travelling. I've just been everywhere. But I think the bit of travelling that really made an impact on me over the last few weeks was on Bank Holiday Monday. I went to see my mother in Manchester. So I'm originally from Manchester, and she lives in Prestwich. I don't know if anybody knows Manchester, but Prestwich is it's a really nice part of Manchester. A lovely day and all the rest of it. And then I came back into town and had to walk from one end of the city centre to the other to get a train, and it just felt as though I was walking through a dystopian nightmare. It was full of, well, first of all, it was filthy, right? The city centre was just filthy. It was full of kind of homeless people just lurching around dead in the eyes. It was full of gangs of Asian lads with masks on and all dressed identically in black or grey tracksuits. There was a woman in a doorway just defecating in a doorway. Yeah. And so it kind of shocked me, and I tweeted about it, and the tweet went viral. And I went on a podcast, Nick Buckley's podcast. I don't know if anybody watches it, but yeah, you might have seen it. And we talked about it quite a lot, and the video's done quite well. And it made me think about actually my own adolescence and my own growing up in that city. I was very much part of the city. I was in a band. I played in a kind of rock and roll band. I was very much part of the nightclub culture, and I loved the city. It was my city, and I couldn't believe how much it had changed, how much that sense of identity, that sense of region, that sense of self had just gone. And it got me to thinking about the broader country and the broader culture in general, and what we really call home and what's changed. Because I was thinking about that time, and this was the late 80s, early 90s. Now, quite a lot of people are looking back to that time, the 1990s, and seeing it as some kind of, utopian era where people were quite free and people were quite happy. We could do what we want, and we had a sense of self, and we had a sense of identity, and we had a sense of culture, and all of those things. There was a sense of society. And I think there's something in that, although at the time it seemed a really anodyne and bland and boring kind of time, which says something really terrible about where we are now, I think. We don't have any kind of culture. The overriding feeling that I had as I was walking through Manchester was one actually of personal fear. I was actually quite frightened for my own safety because it was such a hostile environment. And I look back over the last 10, 15, 20 years or so, and I think that sense of hostility, that sense of fracture, that sense of fragmentation has actually eaten away at the culture. And I think that my walk through Manchester kind of represented, I think, where we are in the culture. You can talk about when things went kind of really wrong or when things went berserk. And you can go right back to the 19th century. You can talk about Fabians, you can talk about the post-war First New Left, you can talk about the counterculture of the 1960s, the really nastiness of the 1970s, and so on and so forth. But I think in my experience, it kind of went on steroids about 10, 12 years ago. And that sense of activism, the idea that we must all be activists, and activists drive the culture and drive change, and everything must change, I think really started then, or at least that's when I became really aware of feeling uncomfortable. Because before then, I'd worked in academia since 1999. And I was always a bit of on the margins, okay? Because it was completely dominated by the left. It was, it was utopian, it was crazy, but you could actually argue back sometimes, right? You could say, no, I don't actually think that. And they'd argue back and all the rest of it, but they didn't think you were evil, right? All of a sudden, with identity politics, there was a sense that if you did argue back, if you did say, well, I don't think that, or I don't feel that, or I don't believe that if today I feel a bit feminine, then I am a woman, right? I don't believe that I am a woman, right? Before 2015, you could kind of say that. There was a time after that where you really couldn't. And I remember being in a meeting, it was that time after COVID, where we started using Zoom for the first time. And if you worked, in the public sector, or you did any kind of work and you had to have meetings, or your life became this celebrity squares of Zoom. Do you remember? And I remember being in a meeting and feeling extremely uncomfortable because one of my colleagues was not only wearing a mask, it had, in a meeting, yeah, it had a rainbow on it, but that wasn't all. She was wearing a pair of glasses, and they had trans flags on the on the frames. And I thought to myself, crikey. I look back to 2015, 2016, and it started with Me Too. Then it went to BLM, right? Then we all got locked down and everyone went a bit crazy. Then men came out of lockdown thinking they were women because they'd been involved with too much porn on their own for a year. Then everybody went totally berserk about the environment. Then it was bloody Hamas, for God's sake. All of these things are iterations of the same thing, aren't they? Okay? They are iterations of an attack on who and what we are as a country, as a society, and as a culture. It's just the next big thing, isn't it? I've been, like I say, in academia for about 25 years. And I'd worked at one particular institution for about 17 years when all of a sudden it just came to a crashing halt. Now, I'm not going to talk massively about that because most people will know about it. But it's quite a difficult thing when you get cancelled, and it's quite stressful. One of the really stressful things was that I had on campus, there were a poster campaign of my face distorted, kind of like this, and Philip Kissely, Islamophobe, on the campus where I work. Now, when that kind of thing happens, you've got to be a bit careful because it's serious. They're serious. They mean business. And all sorts of things happened, and there was an investigation, and nothing happened, and then there was more of an investigation, nothing happened, and eventually I left. But it felt as though, for me, the university system had kind of ground to a halt, actually. And it wasn't just about the university system, it was about education in general. I don't think we were teaching people. I think we were indoctrinating them. Yeah. And I think that the same thing comes from schools. I think the same thing comes from colleges. I think the same thing is absolutely across the board in universities. And it feels like the arts, the social sciences, the humanities, all of the stuff that actually we're interested in is grinding to a halt in academia and in education generally. And I would say, actually, that's something to celebrate because there's no way we can get back from where we are, I don't think, right, in terms of formal education. I don't think we can grab hold of the universities and say, right, well, you need to do this, 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 and this, and it's all going to be okay. And I'll give you an example why. There was the ruling a few weeks ago, wasn't there, that said men are men and women are women, and you have to take that on board, right? Immediately, there was a big petition, lots and lots of academics signing it, saying, no, we're not going to put up with this. Our feminism is intersectional. We want men in female spaces. What happened there then is this sense that you cannot impose sense by legislation, right? Because these people are in... Sorry? Say that again? Well, they are in Cuckoo Lab, but they're also in lecture theatres. They're in seminar rooms. They're in classrooms. They've got tenure, okay? This is nothing new. The reason I got involved with New Culture Forum in the first place was back at BLM, right? They were in 2019, and there were lots of people taking the knee, squatting. There was this whole thing. We were having meetings, and people were having meetings on their knees, and we were saying that, you know, we must kind of worship criminals from other countries, all of that kind of stuff. And we were rewriting our history, okay? And I thought I was going mad. right? I was looking at this stuff. I was looking at the mainstream media. I was listening to the BBC, right? In the morning, because you have habits, right? So in the morning, I'd have the, what's it called? The Today programme, Radio 4, come on at 6:30 as an alarm. And I used to wonder why I was in a bad mood for most of the morning. And it's because I've been kind of, when you're semi-asleep, and I had Radio 4 telling me off for half an hour. You are bad. You're a white man. You're a white, heterosexual, able-bodied man. You are bad. That's essentially what I was getting. And then I kind of realized, right, well, maybe I'll turn it off. Okay, so I turned it off. And I just got more and more concerned about what was going on. And can you still hear me? Yeah. So I wrote an article for Spiked. I don't know if anybody reads Spiked. Yeah. And it was about, British history. There's more to British history than racism, because that's all it was, And I kind of gave the other side. It's not all about slavery. Maybe it's about Wilberforce, Maybe it's about what we've given to the world and all of that kind of thing. And it was round about that time that I got involved with New Culture Forum. And 2019 was actually a very different time to 2025. I really did feel massively alone. I genuinely thought I was going mad. I was working in an institution where everybody hated me. They'd stop talking to me, okay? You go into the staff room, I'd walk in, and it'd be silence, And I know damn well they'd been talking perfectly well and happy a few minutes ago. That kind of thing. And I thought, there must be other people like me out there. But at that particular time, there was only the New Culture Forum. Jordan Peterson was about, wasn't he? Douglas Murray was saying kinds of stuff, doing things. There were kind of, something was forming, but there wasn't much stuff. And so I got involved with New Culture Forum, and I started appearing on shows, and I started doing interviews and all the rest of it. Cut to 2025, there are loads of things happening now, aren't there? There's GB News, or, you might have your own views about GB News, but there is GB News, there's Talk TV, there are so many YouTube channels, right? So many important YouTube channels with huge followings. There is a whole alternative media. And that is really, really superb, I think, okay? That makes me incredibly optimistic. And being optimistic is not that easy to do these days. And you do have to think about what is happening and what's good and what we can do, right? And I think being in this room is a really important and rebellious act, right? I really do think it is, because I think the idea of association, people getting together, discussing things, it's frightening, isn't it? Discussing things, talking things through, actually just seeing if we're all right. Are you okay? How do you feel? What's been happening? That kind of thing is just so important. That kind of stuff wasn't happening before. So there is a change. Organisations like New Culture Forum Locals, the Free Speech Union, lots and lots of other kinds of organisations, all of these things give us a voice. And I think we've got power and safety in numbers. I think that's really, really important, right? Because I'm not on my own, because I know you're with me, right? And that is hugely important. We've got to think about what that means and think about what we can do with that. Now, New Culture Forum Locals is different things to different people. It can be just about getting together for a drink and having a whinge about politics. That's fine, right? But it can also be about campaigning. It can also be about events like this, which are fundamentally educational, aren't they? There's something of the, it's a slightly different thing, but there's something of the Burkean little platoons about this. There's something independent. There's something rebellious. And it feels as though with this kind of association, with this kind of gathering, we're actually empowered to be rebellious. And I don't think it's just us, okay? There aren't a huge amount of really young people in this room, actually. But that doesn't matter, okay? We're all two youngish people. That doesn't matter. But I think one of the real strengths and one of the great weapons we've got is young people. I honestly do, right? Because, I'll tell you why, young people are fundamentally rebellious, right? I was, you probably were. My God, I was really hedonistic. Young people push back against the establishment, and the establishment is blue-haired, non-binary, race-obsessed. It is, no matter what they say, they are the establishment, right? If you think in lockstep with the universities, with Google, yeah, with the mainstream media, you are not rebellious. Not in the slightest, and young people are picking up on that. Is it dangerous to kind of push back? Yes, it is. It's still really dangerous. So when I went through all of my cancellation stuff about 18 months ago, I remember in the January, wet, rainy, horrible, miserable, you know what January's like, it's miserable enough as it is. But if you're worried about, is my next paycheck going to go into the account? What's going to happen to my career? What's going to happen to me? You know, I'm going to put the house on the market. I actually went up to a car park in Leeds, the highest car park in Leeds. And I went to the edge and looked over the edge. I thought, what would it be like if I threw myself off? I actually looked over the edge and thought, oh God, this is dangerous. I better get started. I'm going to hurt myself. I was never going to do it. But the fact I was flirting with those ideas, toying with them, says quite a lot actually about where I was at that time. No, I was perfectly fine. It was never going to happen to me. And actually being cancelled was the best thing that could ever happen to me. I'm here today, right? I massively enjoy myself across media. I've got huge platforms. It's superb. But for some people, it isn't like that. There are academics, an academic I've talked about before called Pete Newbon, who did do that, threw himself off a bridge, killed himself because he was cancelled. Massive pile-on, thousands and thousands of people. So it is dangerous. We are Winston Smiths. We are pushing against the tide. We are revolutionaries in a way. Conservative revolutionaries, but we're revolutionaries. So we need each other. And I think that New Culture Forum locals and other organisations which are quite similar are so valuable because of all of those things. Now, are we going to change everything in nothing flat? Can little people like us make massive change? Not on our own. No, of course we can't. But there is, as I say, an independent media. There is, as I say, a genuine contempt for this government. There is, as Ben said before, a desperate sense to reclaim something of who and what we are. And it's interesting, isn't it, that, you know, the elections that we've just had went so catastrophically bad, and Keir Starmer's response was, well, let's do more, let's go faster, let's go harder, let's have change. We don't want change. If we want change of any kind, we want change back. We want change to something like what we were. Because when I was talking about the 90s, actually, people were happy then. Do you remember that? Happiness. But people were. There was research, lots of polls, lots of data. People were genuinely happy. And it didn't matter what colour you were or religion you were genuinely pretty happy with your lot because we got to a place where actually it was okay. Yeah? It was only when identity politics kicked in and you were told that you're this, 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 and this, so you must be unhappy because you're being oppressed, that everybody became terribly unhappy. Now, a lot of that is down to social media because these things spread, don't they? Ideas spread like viruses. So social media is bad in some respects, but it's very good in others. If it wasn't for social media, we wouldn't be in this room today. So we have to think about how we can use the tools at our disposal and think about how we can move forward together and make change. And I think that change is personal. It starts with us and it starts at home. It's about taking personal responsibility. It's about understanding what's happening in schools and what your children are learning. It's about getting involved with, I don't like using community because the word is tainted now, but getting involved with neighborhoods, getting involved with local politics, getting involved with national politics in 2029, really getting involved with locals and seeing how we can push change. It's all of those things. And I think we can make a difference. And it is about not shying away from the big issues. Do we have an issue with Islam and Islamist fundamentalism? Yes, of course we do. A massive issue. And we need to think how we tackle it, because time is really running out. We are facing an existential crisis. We have open borders. We have a sense of self-loathing. We have an establishment that seems to want to obliterate us as a culture. All of these things are really important, and all of these things are the kinds of things that we need to address. Now, you can't actually think about those things in a massive scale. It's almost like being an alcoholic in a way. If you think, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic, I desperately need a drink, and someone tells you you can't have a drink for the rest of your life now, that's a pretty big thing. But if you say, well, I won't drink today and I won't drink tomorrow, if you break it down incrementally and think about how you can deal with it, then it becomes, you can actually do it. And I think that's what we've got to do. Yes, we've got to keep our eye on the big picture. Yes, we've got to push in terms of politics, but we've got to think personally what we can do in our lives and in our homes and in our neighborhoods. And if you think about that and work incrementally on that, then I think that's a really good start.
Finally, please like, subscribe and comment below, and a big shout out to our Patreon supporters, and thank you for watching.